Welcome back to our true crime profile on Ted Bundy. As you recall last time, Bundy committed numerous horrific attacks and murders in the state of Washington. On a hot summer day on July 14th, 1974, there were broad daylight abductions of two women from a crowded beach at Lake Sammamish State Park located in Issaquah. Now, as a teen, I would often swim at this very same location, as this particular beach had a sandy bottom, unlike the rocky bottom of many Seattle beaches, and it was also shallow, so usually frigid Seattle waters could heat up more easily by the afternoon. On that specific date, 4 female witnesses later described an attractive young man wearing a white tennis outfit with his left arm in a sling, who introduced himself as being Ted, and he asked for their help in unloading a sailboat from his tan or bronze-colored Volkswagen Beetle. Of these 4, 3 of them refused his offer for assistance, but one went with him to his vehicle, but when she saw there was no sailboat, she fled. 3 additional witnesses saw him approach Janice Ann Ott, age 23, who was a probation caseworker at King County Juvenile Court. He went with him and left the beach in his company. About 4 hours later, Denise Marie Naslund, who was 19 years old and studying to be a computer programmer, left a picnic she was attending to go to the bathroom, but she never returned. Bundy later told investigators that Ott was still alive when he returned with Naslund, and that he forced one to watch while he murdered the other. But he later denied this in an interview on the eve of his execution. The King County Sheriff's Office, now armed with enough evidence for a good description of the suspect, posted flyers throughout the Seattle area, and a composite sketch was printed in local newspapers and broadcast on local news networks. Multiple individuals, including Ann Rule, immediately thought that it looked very similar to Ted Bundy, but detectives who were by that time being flooded with as many as 200 tips per day thought it was unlikely that the clean-cut law student with no criminal record could possibly be the killer. As I stated earlier, Bundy was a master manipulator and able to fool a lot of people to his advantage. Besides Washington State, Bundy also killed in Oregon, then committed murders in Idaho, Utah, and Colorado, before eventually moving on to Florida. A former girlfriend named Elizabeth Klopfer called King County Police a second time after reading that women were disappearing in small towns around Salt Lake City. Detective Randy Hergesheimer of the King County Police Major Crimes Division interviewed her in detail, and by then Bundy had considerably risen on their long list of suspects. But of the Lake Sammamish killings, the witness considered to be most reliable failed to identify Bundy in a photo lineup. About a month later, Elizabeth Klopfer called the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and again repeated her suspicions, and they added Ted Bundy to their list of suspects. But they still had no credible forensic evidence to arrest him. In January 1975, Bundy returned to Seattle and spent a week with Elizabeth, who did not tell him that she had called police on 3 separate occasions. At that time, innovative strategy of compiling a database was virtually unknown except to agencies like the FBI. In Washington State, investigators were still trying to analyze all the evidence they had in all of these cases. And in an effort to make sense of all the information and data they had, they entered all kinds of information on Volkswagens, individuals named Ted, known sex offenders, and then whittled it down. 26 of the names appeared on 4 lists, and one of those was Ted Bundy. Detectives also manually compiled a list of 100 top suspects, and Ted was on that list as well. Then came law enforcement's big break. On August 16, 1975, Bundy was arrested by a Utah Highway Patrol officer who noticed that Bundy's Volkswagen's front passenger seat had been removed. He noticed that it had been placed on the rear seats, and with suspicion of probable cause, he searched the vehicle, whereby he found a ski mask and a second mask made from a pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items he assumed were burglary tools. Bundy quickly tried to explain that the ski mask was for skiing, and that he found the handcuffs in a dumpster, and the rest were just common household items. Nothing to be concerned about. Detective Jerry Thompson remembered a similar suspect from a November 1974 kidnapping and recalled Bundy's name from Elizabeth Klopfer's phone call a month earlier. Police obtained a warrant, and after a search of Bundy's apartment, they found suspicious items, but not sufficient enough to detain Bundy, so he was released on his own recognizance. Bundy later stated that police missed a hidden collection of Polaroid photographs of many of his victims, which he quickly destroyed after his release. Salt Lake police put Bundy on 24-hour surveillance, and Detective Thompson flew to Seattle to meet with detectives there to see what they had on Bundy. Now there was enough evidence to arrest him for kidnapping a female teenager named Carol DeRanch at a mall in Murray, Utah, located outside of Salt Lake City, in November 1974. As he had with other targets, he lured her to his Volkswagen, and it claimed to be a police officer flashing a badge. She was a little leery at first because he was in plain clothes, but he explained that she had a car break-in of her vehicle and he needed to talk to her at the station. But once she got inside his Volkswagen, she smelled alcohol on his breath, and she told him that he was going the wrong way to the police station, at which point he pulled out a gun and handcuffed her. But while driving, must have not noticed that he cuffed her on the same wrist twice. She soon fought back and started to flee out his door, whereby he came over her from the driver's side to her side, and they started to fight. He pulled over to the side of the road and tried to bludgeon her into submission with the crowbar. But two witnesses approached the car from the other direction, and seeing possibly her only way to escape, she lunged into their car, with the pair of handcuffs still dangling from one of her wrists. She was very lucky. Unbeknownst to her, that night, Ted Bundy found another victim, 17-year-old Deborah Kent. On October 2nd, 1975, detectives put Bundy in a lineup, and witnesses immediately recognized him. Bundy was freed, though, on $15,000 bail put up by his parents. And while he was out, he spent most of his time at his girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer's house, who must have been terrified. By November 1975, three principal investigators in Ted Bundy cases, Jerry Thompson from Utah, Robert Capel from Washington, with Detective Michael Fisher from Colorado, all met in Aspen to exchange information on cases they were working. They all agreed that Ted Bundy was their suspect, but they also agreed that more hard evidence was needed before they could charge him with other cases and murders. In February 1976, Bundy stood trial for the Carol DeRanch kidnapping, and he was found guilty of kidnapping and assault. In June of that year, he was sentenced to 15 years in Utah State Prison. On June 7, 1977, Bundy was transported 40 miles from the Garfield County Jail to the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for a preliminary hearing on another case, and he elected to serve as his own attorney pro se. Due to this, he was excused by the judge from wearing handcuffs or leg restraints. And during recess, he asked to use the courthouse bathroom, whereby he opened up a window and escaped by jumping to the ground. He broke into a local hunting cabin and stole food, clothing, and a rifle, and broke into several other places and stole vehicles while he was on the run. But maybe thinking he was smarter than he was, he drove back to Aspen and was caught 6 days after his escape. Bundy was back in custody, but he had a new escape plan. He acquired a detailed floor plan of the Garfield County Jail and acquired a hacksaw blade from other inmates, whereby he started to cut through the bars in his cell. He made several previous practice runs before the night of December 30th, with most of the jail staff out on Christmas break and many nonviolent prisoners out on furlough with their families. Bundy then made his bed stuffed with objects to make it look like he was still present during count, then climbed up to the ceiling and broke into the apartment of the chief jailer, who just so happened to be out with his wife that night. Bundy changed his street clothes from the jailer's closet and walked out the front door to freedom. After stealing a car, Bundy then broke down, but caught a bus to Denver, where he boarded a morning flight to Chicago. Jail staff did not notice that Bundy escaped until December 31st, around noon count. By that time, it had been 17 hours later. Lesson learned there for some of you corrections folks. Don't go for the okie doke. You're supposed to check for live, breathing flesh. And this is just one reason why. From Chicago, Bundy traveled to Michigan. Perhaps he thought he would mislead investigators into thinking that he had fled into Canada. But instead, he headed south to Atlanta, Georgia first, and then boarded a bus for Tallahassee, Florida, where he arrived on the morning of January 8th. He then rented a room under the alias Chris Hagen at a boarding house near the Florida State University campus. He was definitely sick in the head and a lust for young women and murder that could not be stopped. Bundy later stated that he initially thought about finding legitimate employment and refraining from any criminal activity and laying low in Florida. But he just could not help himself from his old habits and plans to find new victims. In the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, Just 1 week after his arrival in Tallahassee, Florida, Bundy gained access to Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house. He then bludgeoned Margaret Bowman, age 21, with a heavy piece of oak firewood as she slept, crushing her skull in. He then garroted her neck with a nylon stocking and ripped her underwear off so hard that it left burn marks on her thighs. After killing Bowman, he walked directly across the hall and entered the room of 20-year-old Lisa Levy, beating her unconscious and strangling her. In what would become one of the key pieces of evidence against Bundy, he bit deeply into her left buttock, leaving teeth marks that matched his dental records, and bit through one of her nipples, almost severing her breasts. He then raped her vaginally and anally with a hair mist bottle, so violently that it ruptured her internal organs. In an adjoining bedroom, he attacked Kathy Kleiner, who suffered a concussion, a broken jaw, loss of teeth, and a crushed finger. Both Chandler and Kleiner survived their attacks, but Levy did not. Bundy was like a mad, rabid dog that needed to be put down. But he was not done yet. At approximately 4 a.m. in the morning, he found FSU student Cheryl Thomas asleep in her bed and viciously attacked her, dislocating her shoulder as well as fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. The fact that Bundy had attacked Thomas so soon after the other murders totally bewildered law enforcement, including Sheriff Ken Katsaris. But Bundy was no ordinary killer. On February 8th, Bundy drove to Jacksonville, Florida, in a stolen FSU van, whereby he approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter in a parking lot. She just so happened to be the daughter of the Jacksonville Police Department's chief of detectives. He identified himself to Leslie as being Richard Burton from the fire department, but retreated when Leslie's older brother arrived and confronted him. Bundy then backtracked 60 miles west to Lake City, Florida, where he found a 12-year-old named Kimberly Diane Leach, who turned up missing at the school. 7 weeks later, after an extensive search, they found Kimberly's body in a pig shed and believed that she had been raped before her throat was cut by Bundy. On February 15, 1978, Bundy was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line after running his vehicle and showing that the Volkswagen Beetle that Bundy was driving came up stolen. When told he was under arrest, Bundy kicked Lee's legs out from under him and took off running. Lee fired 2 warning shots before he tackled Bundy. The two struggled over Lee's gun before the officer was finally able to overcome him and subdue him. Lee transported his suspect to jail unaware that he had appeared on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, but did recall Bundy saying, "I wish you had killed me." He would get his wish soon.
Step out, Mr. Bundy. What do we have here, Ken? Let's see. Oh, it's an indictment, all right. Why don't you read it to me? You're up for election, aren't you?
Mr. Bundy?
You got it, didn't you?
Mr. Bundy?
You told him that you were going to get me. He said he was going to get me, okay? You've got the indictment. It's all you're going to get. Let's read it. Let's go.
Theodore Robert Bundy, you are charged, indictment, 2 counts burglary and 2 counts murder in the first degree, 3 counts attempted murder in the first degree. In the name of and by the authority of the state of Florida, the grand jurors of the state of Florida impaneled and sworn to inquire and true presentment make in and for the county of Leon upon their oaths do present that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully enter or remain in a structure located at 661 West Jefferson Street, the dwelling of Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner with the intent to commit the offense of battery therein. In the course of committing such burglary, said Theodore Robert Bundy did make an assault upon Karen Chandler and or Kathy Kleiner, contrary to section 81002 Florida statutes.
Very good.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully kill a human being, to wit, Margaret Bowman, by strangling and or beating her, and said killing was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Margaret Bowman, contrary to section 78204 Florida statutes. And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully kill a human being, to wit, Lisa Levy, by strangling and or beating her, and said killing was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design, or intent to effect the death of said Lisa Levy,
My chance to talk to the press.
contrary to Section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jurors being present in said court further gives the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Karen Chandler, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally causing great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Karen Chandler, contrary to Section 77704, 7780204 Florida statutes. And your grand jurors being present in said court further give the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Kathy Kleiner, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally caused great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Kathy Kleiner, contrary to Section 77704, 78204 Florida statute. And your grand jurors being present in said court further give the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully enter or remain in a structure located at 431A Dunwoody, the dwelling of Cheryl Thomas, with the intent to commit the offense of battery therein, and in the course of committing such burglary, the said Theodore Robert Bundy did make an assault upon Cheryl Thomas, contrary to Section 81002 of Florida statutes. And your grand jurors being present in said court further give the court to be informed and understand that Theodore Robert Bundy on the 15th day of January 1978 in Leon County, Florida, did then and there unlawfully attempt to kill a human being, to wit, Cheryl Thomas, by beating her about the head and knowingly or intentionally causing great bodily harm, and said attempt was perpetrated by said Theodore Robert Bundy from or with a premeditated design or intent to effect the death of said Cheryl Thomas, contrary to Section 7704 and 78204 Florida statutes, contrary to the form of the statute in such case made and provided and against the peace and dignity of the state of Florida. That is the indictment handed down by the grand jury. This is the capias for your arrest for burglary of the dwelling, 2 counts, murder first degree, 2 counts, attempted murder first degree, 3 counts. I am commanded to keep you in safe custody and bring you before the spring term of the Circuit Court 1978 for the pending court of this county for those charges that I just read to you in case number 78-670, State of Florida versus Theodore Robert Bundy.
Is that my copy?
No, it is not.
Am I going
Here's
to get
your
a copy?
We have your copy. You have the
I
copy.
have a copy. How about the capias?
You'll get that.
I talked to the press. I mean, we've had our chance. We've displayed the prisoner now. I think it's my turn. Pardon me, which one?
I think that
Well, listen, I've been kept in isolation for 6 months. I've been kept away from the press. I've been buried by you. You've been talking for 6 months. I think it's my turn now. All right?
we got a court order that there won't be any press interviews.
Sure, there won't be any press interviews. You've given them out. I'm gagged. You're not.
Okay. Captain
All right.
Proctor will read your
I'll
right.
be heard.
Bundy stood trial for the Chi Omega homicides and assaults at Florida State University in June 1979. Being a hardcore narcissist, Bundy handled his own defense, and he was not a very good lawyer. Bundy considered making a plea bargain to spare himself the death penalty, but at the last minute refused to take a deal. It made him realize he was going to have to stand up in front of a jury and tell the whole world he was guilty, and he just could not come to grips with that. He viewed himself as so slick, he thought he could get away with all this. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours before convicting Bundy on July 24th, 1979, of 3 counts of murder and other charges. 6 months later, another trial took place where he was convicted in the murder of Kimberly Leach. On February 10th, 1980, Bundy was sentenced to death by electrocution by the state of Florida. Bundy was finally put to death in an electric chair on January 24th, 1989. Crowds gathered outside the prison and cheered. And so ended the life of a monster named Theodore Robert Bundy. I know all these crimes were very disturbing, but I hope there are some lessons to be learned that we should all know. Don't talk to strangers and never underestimate anybody. My intent is not to have you live your life in fear, but I do hope that it makes some people become more careful and alert to their surroundings, as I'm sure there are more Ted Bundys out there. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.